Kristin, Tate, thanks so much for joining us on Wall Street Unplugged.
Thanks for having me, Frank. I'm excited to be with the show.
So, watching on TV all the time, but we do have an audience, and maybe a couple people aren't familiar with you. So, I wanted to start off with, it's probably not going to be the easiest question, but it's going to be a cool question, I think. You spend most of your time, your career studying politics, economics, taxes, government spending. What was your motivation? I know it was marketing and journalism, but getting into this specific area, and did it surprise you at this stage, when early on you got in it to where it is right now with some of the things you find, because you're a data person and some of the data that you report, we're going to get to in a little while, is amazing. But how did you come to this point? What was your motivation?
So I actually wanted to be a reporter, a hard news reporter when I was in college, but I ended up getting an internship working for John Stossel over at the Fox Business Network. He had just moved from ABC to Fox Business, and it was his first year doing his show there. And he's the one who got me hooked on this kind of line of journalism. And then from there, I got really interested in reporting on taxes, government waste, and government spending, and realized just how, clueless many Americans are as to how their tax dollars are being spent, particularly younger Americans, the people who are just entering the job market, or perhaps even baby boomers. And so I really wanted to shed a light on government waste, government spending, and show people exactly how their hard-earned tax dollars are being spent every day. So that's kind of broadly how I got into this and what motivates me to do this work.
Are you amazed in today's day and age that even though you provide data, again, which you're going to get into some amazing things, right? Things that and then the data behind it, which I found amazing when I was researching you. Do you find it amazing that no matter what kind of data and what kind of facts you present people, especially even the younger generation, that it seems like they're never going to change their mind?
Actually, I would say a lot of the younger people I speak with are changing their minds, particularly on fiscal issues. And it's a combination of presenting them with data, but also their own life experiences, right? As young people kind of get into the workforce and get real jobs and earn enough where they're not paying the earned income tax credit anymore, they start to get a little pissed off. Like, hey, the government's taking 20 to 30% of my money. Where the heck is it going? And a lot of these young people still identify as Democrats, and they're voting for tax and spend politicians. When you really ask them about the issues, when you get into each individual issue, you find that many of them are actually more libertarian. They're certainly socially more to the left, but not so much when it comes to the fiscal issues. So I really urge young people, particularly when they're voting, don't just vote on emotion. Don't just vote on those social issues, because guess what? You're not going to have any social justice in this country if our economy collapses. I mean, look at any economy throughout world history that has completely collapsed or come under communist or socialist rule. Your social justice issues, those go out the window. So I have actually seen people change their minds gradually. But again, it's that combination of both being presented with facts, but also getting their own paychecks siphoned off into these various government coffers.
No, that's great. I'm glad you're able to change people's minds. It just seems like if it's always being pushed as either or one agenda, right? It seems, you got to be on one side or the other, right? It can't be, you agree with some things and you don't agree with other things. It's either or in today's world, I feel like. And let's stay on the subject with young kids, because one of the things that impacts them is the massive student debt, which, for me, I can't believe that, the colleges, right, are not held more responsible, right? Because these guys are raising tuition by 3x to 5x more than the rate of inflation. Nobody wants to talk to them. They're getting paid by the government. They keep raising. Everyone wants to blame everybody else. But we have a mandate that could come out that, about, that's been talked about, and by the current administration, saying that they might just cancel all student loan debt. For me, what example does that set? And you've come up with amazing studies, which surprised the hell out of me, of why this isn't, from a political perspective, it's probably different than what you think is going to happen if this initiative gets done.
Right. There are so many problems with the initiative. First, I would just respond to your point and say, I actually don't put any blame on the colleges themselves. I mean, they're doing what any business would do, right? If you could charge $1 million per year and people will pay that, obviously you're going to charge $1 million per year. So there's a supply and demand here, and the colleges are charging what people are willing to pay. The problem here is that kids can get financing for these insane college tuition rates to get these degrees that have little to no return on investment. So I'll give you a great example. I went to Emerson College in Boston. It's kind of an art school. People go there to study film, communications, journalism. A degree there costs you almost $60,000 today, and that's before even room and board. I would argue that's a terrible return on investment, and I'm still paying off my loans over a decade later. And but you know, kids pay that because they can get financing from the government. The federal government funds about 80% of all student loans. They do this regardless of the individual's credit history, the return on investment of the degree, or the college tuition. This allows colleges to just continue to hike their rates with impunity because they know no matter what they charge, these kids will get the financing. And now you have an entire generation of kids who have been sold a bill of goods by the system, and they realize they have to pay this money back, and they're not making a lot of money because these degrees, again, are not, you know, leading to high-paying jobs in many cases. So now they're demanding that all of these loans just be forgiven by federal tax dollars. Well, there are so many problems with that. The biggest I can think of just off the top of my head is that when you forgive these student loans, you're just incentivizing the next generation to do the same thing. I mean, why shouldn't they take out insane loans from the government and then just, again, demand a bailout? It's just going to be a recurring cycle, and the colleges will just keep hiking tuition. Another problem is that the Federal Reserve has released these incredible statistics showing that the vast majority of student loan debt actually belongs to middle and upper income earners. So what this would essentially do is act as a wealth transfer from taxpayers, which include, of course, blue collar workers and minority workers who don't make a lot of money, to middle and upper income people who went to these liberal arts colleges and studied feminist dance theory or, you know, Russian literature. It's just so unfair, especially I would add to those people who either paid their debt down quickly and now are debt free and have to subsidize the debt of people who have not been responsible in paying off their debt quickly, and to the folks who wanted to go to college but maybe made the decision they were not going to go because they couldn't afford it. So instead they went into a trade. That's the responsible thing to do. And now those people are being punished by having to subsidize the student debt of someone who maybe made a less responsible decision. So those are just the biggest problems with it. I could keep going on this, but it's just a bad path to go down. And I suspect, though, the Biden administration will do some form of student loan bailouts.
It is interesting, and that was the data point that I wanted to get to when you actually say, based on the Federal Reserve and their statistics, student loan debt belongs to middle, upper income households, at least the majority of it. So it will largely be a wealth transfer from taxpayers, including blue collar minority workers, to disproportionately middle and high income earners. Obviously, I'm quoting you there. Do you think this move is more political, or is this really about the students? Because if it's political and you're looking at this, what you uncovered there, it makes me a little nervous that it wouldn't get done. Not that I want it to get done or not. I don't think you're setting the right example, especially for the people who did pay their way out of that debt. It's just a certain type of character, right? That you build doing that, and an appreciation of saving and working hard. I think going through that process and getting out of it, and you're just telling everyone, "Hey, no, too bad. We're going to give it away for free for everybody else." But do you still think it gets done when you look at the facts and say, "Well, maybe this isn't helping out the group that we thought. Maybe it's just help." Is that going to skew anything in terms of this policy or the Biden administration doing anything, or no?
I think it gets done in some form. So there are several ways that this could happen. They could just say, everyone who has federal student loans, we're going to forgive whatever, $10,000 worth of those loans. Another way they could do it is they could actually target low income earners who have college debt and say, okay, we're only going to pay off the debt of people who are making whatever it is, you could say under $50,000. Now that sounds a little better, initially, but the problem with that is then you're essentially rewarding people who chose to get expensive degrees that actually don't lead to high paying careers, therefore incentivizing more people to do the same. So essentially you are not paying off the student debt of people who were more likely to study STEM majors, for example, the sciences, the maths. These are the majors we want more of in our society to create productive citizens. And instead you are rewarding people who went and studied, perhaps these more fluffy liberal arts majors that really our society does not need more of. And you're therefore encouraging more students to go out and get these degrees in, woke social justice studies because they know they will probably have their debt forgiven. So, there's kind of complaints regardless of how they do this, because if they do the blanket forgiveness, then you really are subsidizing high and middle income earners. If you just target the low earners, then you're rewarding the people who studied the majors that really are not very practical, and we don't want to encourage more people to go into those studies. But to answer your initial question, yes, I do think the Biden administration will get this done in some capacity, because it has been a repeated promise of his on the campaign trail. And of course, now the Democrats have unified control, so it won't be very hard for them to do. In fact, I've heard that they may even try to slip something like this into a COVID relief bill. I have no idea what that has to do with COVID relief, but these COVID bills are packed with pork, so it really wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, we won't go there, but I did want to transition here, and great stuff, student Ted. Let's get into the states that, like, this great migration we're seeing from places like New York, California. I think, we're seeing it now, but this is something you've been talking about since 2019, 18. It's been happening for a while. It's just COVID is really accelerating it, where it's getting on everyone's radar. But I just feel like the statistics you provide are not really showing what's going on. And look, I just feel like sometimes, as someone who started their own business and has two businesses, you're almost getting penalized for being successful or working hard. Like, it's not like we work 15 hours. I know you probably work 15 hours a day, 60, whatever hours a day. But when I look at, the raising of the taxes, where it's going to be already over 60%, right? I think it's going to be up to 70% because they're bringing in no revenue, right? You're seeing very little revenue coming in, but you're almost encouraging these people who support and provide a lot of jobs and, making over $400,000 to actually move out of California, New York, basically saying, listen, we're going to tax the hell out of you. Imagine giving away over 60%, but 70% of everything you earn. But is this a surprise to you that we're seeing this? Because it shouldn't be a surprise on the table. I guess there are certain surprises, because some of the things that you've come up with is, seeing this migration is actually going to be good for, from the blue states into the red states, but it's actually, or from the red states into the blue states, but it's actually going to be good for Democrats going forward, right? And explain that, because that's hard to believe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So my most recent book is called The Liberal Invasion of Red State America, and it followed this exact trend, the blue state to red state migration. And I argued in that book that Republicans focus far too often on immigration along the southern border. And while that's certainly an important topic, I think what's really going to change the political map right under our nose is this domestic migration that had been largely ignored. Now, my book came out in January of 2020, and I had no idea that when it was released, these trends were just about to explode on an unprecedented level because of the COVID pandemic. So, prior to this last year, we were already seeing these trends happening, people leaving big cities in blue states, particularly because of high crime, failing public schools, just exorbitant costs of living. But then when COVID hit, we saw this really double down, because all of a sudden white collar workers were largely given the option to work remotely. People were given a chance to kind of reevaluate where they were living, and people were losing their jobs and saying, hey, my income is lower now. Why am I paying $3,000 a month for this rat infested studio in Manhattan when I could move to, Texas and buy a house and my mortgage will be less. So COVID has really, really spiked these changes. And in fact, it's not just people, as you mentioned, it's businesses. We're seeing Silicon Valley essentially pick up and move out of California. HP is moving to Texas, right outside of Houston. Elon Musk is relocating much of his operations down to Texas. Oracle is moving to Texas. The list goes on and on. And it's kind of a double-edged sword here, right? Because on one hand, this trend is very vindicating to GOP policy, because people are flocking to the places with lower taxes, better quality of life, more fiscal responsibility. On the other hand, this is going to create some real political challenges for Republicans, because you're essentially taking all of these blue state voters and moving them to red states. And many of these folks, unfortunately, just continue to vote in favor of Democrats. And, down ballot in the November elections, we certainly didn't see that blue wave that Democrats were hoping for. But Democrats did close the gap they came close to closing the gap with Republicans in a lot of places that are considered traditionally red states. Particularly if you look at Texas, the biggest suburban areas there really lean Democrat this time. Florida saw some similar trends, Arizona, Tennessee. So this is something the GOP is going to have to really grapple with over the next few years. If they lose Texas, if they lose Florida, it's all over. The Republicans will never win another national election.
Credit to you, by the way, because your book did come out pre-COVID, and you were talking about how Texas could become a swing state, right? And I think people remember you were crazy, but you saw the Democrats campaigning heavily, right, leading up to the election in Texas, right? One of the biggest. So credit to you, because now I think it's easier to see, now COVID's going on, but I want to run this by you because this is from Liberal Invasion of Red State America. So New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Philly, Washington, Portland, Oakland, Chicago. Despite billions of dollars being doled out annually, every one of these cities has dire mismanagement issues, right? So the things that stand out: massive increases in pension and payrolls, right? They all have that common, public payrolls. Many of the worst run cities have ceded more control of academic policy to teachers' unions. Nearly one of these cities, nearly every one of these cities have surging crime rates, right? Pre-COVID. And when I talk about COVID, talk about pre-COVID, because that's when you wrote your book. And it's now, much worse since then. Los Angeles cut its police department budget by $150 million, while the murder rate is up 20%. Washington, Philly, same boat, really highest murder rates in the country. Poverty rates highest in history in New York. Homeless rate in Los Angeles up 12%. This is in 2019 or 2018, right? Again, pre-COVID. Simple question here. Why, when we see this going on, and this isn't like a trend 1, 2, 3, this has been going on for a very long time. Why is it that the citizens, hardworking citizens in these cities and in these areas where they get all these promises showing how it's supposed to be and things are getting worse, why do they continue to vote the same way? Why do they continue to vote for the same policies?
I think it's because people don't think about politics when they make moves. So they're simply moving to these other states for the job opportunities and the lower cost of living, but they're not necessarily connecting those dots. Why is it that all the jobs are in places like Texas, Tennessee, Florida? Why is it that the cost of living is lower? They don't really think that through in many cases. So I think that's a big part of the problem. And I tell native red staters all the time, people who have lived in these red states, you've got to reach out to your new neighbors and explain to them why your home state is flourishing, so that these people understand that if they continue voting for Democrats, they're going to ruin their new homes with high taxes. They'll just recreate the situation they just fled. It kind of reminds me of my home state, New Hampshire, where I grew up. It used to be a very libertarian kind of state. In fact, it was actually more red than it was purple. Very independent people up there. They have that live free or die motto, just an awesome place. But over the last 2 decades, what we've seen is these Massachusetts residents moving from Boston and the surrounding area and just moving north to New Hampshire so that they don't have to pay income tax, sales tax, they can have a better quality of life. Well, guess what? In the last 2 decades, as those people move north, they completely changed the calculus, the political calculus on the ground in New Hampshire. And now the entire state legislature in New Hampshire is largely Democrat. We still have a Republican governor up there, but mostly everyone else in the state house is Democrat. I would not be surprised if in the next decade they institute an income or sales tax. Everything is changing. They voted for Biden up there. I think they went for Hillary Clinton in 2016. So that's a great example of a state that has already seen the transformation happen. And some of these other states like Texas are going in the same direction. I tell people all the time, kids my age don't understand the fact or don't remember that California used to be a very red state, very conservative. And today, Texas's demographics are almost identical to what California's were in the early 1990s, right before that state flipped Democrat and went for Democrats in every single presidential election since. So it is not impossible for Texas to become a swing state. And Republicans can laugh at that all they want. But if they lose Texas, if they don't pay attention to what's going on, they will be sorry, because they will never win another president. They will never win another White House.
Yeah, those are interesting trends. And from someone who's really, engulfed in all of this and really deep in it. And by the way, I don't want to sound like, this is a Democrat Republican thing where there's Republican areas too. And if they're not doing what you want them to do over decades or over, they've been in office, that then, change, try the other side, see what happens. Right. Like for me, that's how, you always want to make yourself better. You always want to hold people accountable. And speaking of accountability, I live in Florida, right? So we handle coronavirus differently. And we got criticized a lot to the point where we're irresponsible and no one's wearing masks, which is not true. We all wear masks, and especially indoors. And a lot of places almost mandate it. Not like it's a law or anything, but, they won't let you shop in the Walmarts and Home Depots unless you're wearing a mask here. Yet DeSantis, who was the governor, got criticized tremendously about how he was handling this. And now you see that there's other states like New York, and that's a place I lived in for over 30 years. I'm a New Yorker at heart. I love it. But just to see how, he was writing a book saying, how great they handle it, and they have more deaths than by far any other state. But not only that, I think there's only 10 countries that have more deaths than New York. But now he's basically switching to and saying we need to open because New York City could die if we don't open, right? Which is kind of the case, I think, how Florida is looking at it. When you see this about face, does it discourage you? Because the data was showing a lot of things going on, and not just COVID and the death rate of COVID. I won't go crazy into statistics because I studied that to death. But I'm just surprised how, it's after the election. It's something that one side was saying, listen, we need to open up because the impact of staying closed could be much more dire. And now we're seeing the about face. I just feel like it's political. Like, why does this have to be political when we really... I understand the politics and you need to be political with some things, but these are people's lives. These are people's jobs. They want to work. You're keeping them home. And now you're saying, oh, well, New York's going to do really bad unless we open it. Wasn't that the case like 4 or 5 months ago? We still have the same data on COVID in terms of, infected rate. The death of infected is going down as a percentage. I'm just surprised at that. Does that annoy you as someone that's in, politics and in a political field where why is it politics when we're talking about people's lives?
Well, perhaps I'm cynical, but I do think it was a totally political move. Just the way that Cuomo in particular handled the COVID lockdowns the whole time was political. My cynical self believes that a lot of these Democrats wanted a recession over the last year because Trump had a phenomenal economy going before the pandemic hit. I mean, the economy was so hot that there were more jobs than people to fill them. We saw record low unemployment for Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, and the Democrats could not have dreamed of something more politically convenient than the pandemic. It shut down private business, got more people dependent on the federal government. They're basically being given a green light to try out universal basic income now by sending monthly checks to everyone from the feds. They are in many ways replacing the private sector with top-down control. So I think in many ways it was absolutely political. And what's really terrifying about that is that we see how little our leaders care about the livelihoods of hardworking Americans. For them, it is all about political gain. It's all about the optics, and they couldn't care less if business owners are struggling. They couldn't care less if their employees are struggling to put food on the table for their families. That's really what this whole pandemic has exposed. And now you have the mask as a sort of political symbol. Joe Biden says that, we're all going to wear masks for the first 100 days. Well, I'm not against mask wearing, but I am sort of skeptical of these kinds of top-down announcements, given that, when the pandemic hit, we were told, okay, 15 days to slow the spread. Everyone just stay home for 15 days. Well, then it turned into, well, now we all need you to stay home until the curve is flattened. Well, the curve was flattened. Then it was, we just need you to stay home now until we have a vaccine. Well, now we have vaccines being put into the arms of Americans. And in many parts of the country, lockdown orders are actually getting stricter. So, I think this is all about power for a lot of people in charge. And that is really sad. But in some ways, it's a good thing that has been exposed.
It has been exposed. Are you nervous about the direction of the country or where we're going in terms of, capitalism, less government, people being able, I'm a believer in people, right? I love people. I think, for me, I love living in America. I've traveled all over the world for my business. I'm boots on the ground, data analyst. I want to see things in person. And people don't realize how great you have it in America. How great, as you complain about everything on your iPhone 12 and Twitter while you're driving around your brand new car that you financed, everyone's complaining and pissed off. Are you nervous about the direction of this country? Because for me, when I see young kids, I want them to work hard. I want them to believe that, and it should be that way, that if you work hard and you really, really, you just totally engulfed in something where it means everything to you, you will be successful. You will. And I just feel like it might be taking a step back from that, or maybe I'm just a little nervous, but I hope that part of it doesn't change no matter who's in office. But it just seems more government, more helping people out, more stimulus, as you said before, and so many people have said, they don't want a stimulus check. They want to work, and we're not letting them work. So how do you feel personally about this? Because, I'm a little worried, not incredibly worried, but I really, truly hope that doesn't change, especially for entrepreneurship and people working hard, and a lot of these kids out there that really want to achieve their goals.
I'm very concerned about it. And not to make this over political, but I mean, the Democrats do tend to be the party that is more likely to want to expand federal control. And they now have unified control. And we're in a pandemic, which is a perfect excuse for them to utilize that power and just expand the size of the federal government and its scope. And what you have now is this generation of people entering the workforce who basically have been taught in public schools that the government exists to provide, that the government exists to make sure that everyone is comfortable. And that is not the purpose of the federal government. The purpose of the federal government is to protect your rights. And so many people just don't believe that anymore. They believe that, the government needs to give everyone what they need to live a comfortable life. And that is a mindset that so many people have nowadays. Meanwhile, yes, entrepreneurs are being hurt terribly. My stepmother owns some small restaurants up in the Boston area, and she can't get a lot of her employees to come back to work because, frankly, with these bonuses, the unemployment bonuses being given out by the federal government due to COVID, when you combine that with state unemployment, you actually make significantly more in many states from staying at home than you do at work if you're, a minimum wage worker. So why would somebody want to go work a 15-hour day at my stepmother's restaurant when they could make more sitting on the couch watching Honey Boo Boo or whatever? It's such a perverse incentive, and entrepreneurs are struggling. I mean, my stepmom can't even find enough people to keep her restaurant going, and meanwhile, they're dealing with increased regulation costs because of COVID. She never had an outdoor seating area before, but now because of COVID, she had to invest a bunch of money to create outdoor seating. And then once she created the outdoor seating, they changed the guidelines for the outdoor seating. So she had to change that again. I mean, it's just never ending. And I do think if the federal government just kind of stepped back a little bit, and some of these state governments as well, we would see people acting responsibly. People always act in their best interest, and we could see the economy really get chugging along again. And people think that they want to stay home, but I think by and large, most people feel more pride and they feel happier in life when they have a purpose, when they have a job to go to. And we really need to get back to that. But I'm not optimistic about the next few years, to answer your initial question.
I could tell you're not optimistic because on your Twitter account, which, and your feed, go ahead, feel free to give it. We're going to talk about your book in a second and how to get it. But what your Twitter feed is?
Kristin B. Tate. Yes, on Twitter.
Okay, so we follow you on Twitter. One of the things that you do tweet about a lot is Bitcoin, right? Which is surprising. So one, are you an investor in Bitcoin? Do you just follow it? Or is that something you look at and say, hey, the fact that this thing is going up is really telling, right? For me, it's going higher, and I've been in Bitcoin for a long time, is you don't trust the government. More spending is coming. It's an alternative. You don't believe in a dollar. You don't believe in fiat. I mean, this shows nervousness, but I noticed that you talk about Bitcoin a lot. I'm just curious, are you an investor or is it just, hey, this is kind of like the writing on the wall here?
Oh, yeah, I've been invested in Bitcoin for a while. I'm also really interested in Ethereum and some of the other the other kind of smaller esoteric currencies as well. I always tell people don't put anything into crypto that you are not prepared to lose just because it's very volatile. It's kind of a speculative asset. I also don't see Bitcoin at this time functioning as an alternative currency. It kind of works as a way to just store your wealth and diversify and protect protect against inflation. Inflation is something I'm extremely concerned about. We were coming into this unified democratic control, and people think, oh, well, they're paying for all these stimulus bills with tax dollars. Not really. I mean, they're paying for some of it with tax dollars, but a lot of this is being funded from borrowing, but also money printing. And every time they print money, they're making us all poorer because they are devaluing the US dollar. And I'm very concerned that we could see not only inflation, but stagflation, like the bad old days of the 1970s under Jimmy Carter. So gold and silver are, of course, great ways to protect against that. But those kind of creep up slowly. Whereas crypto, you can see these huge returns really quickly. It's an exciting way to diversify and kind of give yourself a hedge against potential inflation. But again, it's a risky thing to invest in, and people really need to do their homework before putting money into Bitcoin. But I mean, we could see Bitcoin go up to 100,000 or beyond this year, depending on how many mom and pop investors get into the game. I mean, now that PayPal lets you buy Bitcoin, Visa, Robinhood, it's so easy. A couple years ago, no one knew how to buy this stuff. Now anyone can get in on the game. So I suspect it'll keep going up, but we don't know where the top is. So be careful for all those people out there who want to try.
I love the economics coming out and even the investment because, what we do is we do talk about politics, and then you're going to get people on both sides who get pissed off, or some people are happy, whatever. But the bottom line for people like you, for me, for everyone out there, is the biggest thing is your families, right? Your livelihood. And how do you make money off of it? How do you invest? And just going into that, you engulfed in politics and going into the economics and then saying, and Bitcoin, I was surprised. I thought it was like, hey, I'll learn Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all kinds of crypto. That's awesome. That people are educating themselves on it. It's fantastic. It's it is a good investment. It's a sign of the times. Now, your name of your book, Liberal Invasion of Red State America. If someone wants to learn more about you, learn more about the fantastic book. Again, this was written pre-COVID, so that's why I love it, because it's just seeing it today. It's more powerful, and it's just, it is amazing how much of those trends accelerated that you warned everybody about. But if someone wants to learn more about you and how they can get the book, how can they do that?
My website is KristinBTate.com, and Kristin is spelled with 2 I's, Kristin, btate.com. I also write a weekly column in the Hill newspaper, and my book prior to the liberal invasion of Red State America is called How Do I Tax Thee? Also a timely book if you're curious about all of the ways that you're taxed beyond the income tax. You might be surprised. So my 2 books, The Liberal Invasion of Red State America and How Do I Tax Thee? You can learn more about both of those books on my website, and also find links to my writing at the Hill newspaper as well. And you can find me on social media, obviously. My Twitter handle is the same as my website, Kristin B. Tate.
Yeah, great stuff. And Chris, I know how busy you are. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast, and hopefully join us again soon.
Thank you so much, Frank. It's been an honor to join you.